My name is Jeff White. I'm a divinity student at Acadia Divinity College in my 4th year. And here with me today for an interview is the Reverend Dr. Freeman Fenerty. We welcome you today.
Thanks very much, Jeff. Glad to be here.
Thank you. I want to begin by asking you a question that many people often wonder about. They're amazed by the work you do, all the work you've done through the years, and even now. We wonder how old you are, Mr. Fenerty.
Well, I'll be 89 in February. That's right around the corner.
Yes, coming up pretty soon. Where do you presently live?
I live in Kentville. My daughter and her husband built an apartment on their house, and my wife and I are living there.
Yes. You've lived there before?
We've been living there 5 years.
Yeah.
We didn't live there before.
No. Okay. You have a daughter, you say.
Yeah.
Tell us about the rest of your immediate family.
I have my son is the oldest of the family. He's preaching in Fredericton. He's been up in that area for the last 15 years. And my daughter is married. My daughter's husband is a school teacher, and she is church secretary at Bethany Memorial Church in Aldershot. They have 2 children. They're both from here at Acadia. One graduates this spring and with a computer science degree, and the other is taking the 2nd year in the science program.
That's excellent there. Good reason to be proud of your family.
Oh, I am proud of them.
Yes. I'd like to turn our attention to your own life. Now, where and when were you born, and perhaps you could say something about your parents as well.
Well, I was born in Sackville, Nova Scotia, just outside of Halifax, back in 1907. And you know, at a time when Sackville was a little community, about 100 homes, scattered over 20 miles of highway. And my dad was a carpenter, which took him away from home quite a bit, and left mother quite a bit of the responsibility of the family because of that. It was a good home. We had a good family life.
So your childhood was pleasant?
Very pleasant.
Yes, yeah. Different from the life of a child in Sackville now, I'm sure.
Very much.
Yes.
Very much.
Yeah. Now, we are interested in knowing something about your conversion experience and your religious life back then.
Well, I liken conversion experiences to 2 kinds. One where a stick of dynamite drives a man from one path to another, and the other like a flower blossoming, and mine was like that. Grew up in a Christian home, Sunday school and church from the time I can remember. And however, I came to the place in my life, I was about 15, when I was confronted with the fact of what are you going to do about Jesus Christ? At that point, I made my commitment. So it's hard to say exactly when I accepted Christ. I had done it before that.
I understand. That's very much like my own experience and that of many other people I know.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, the next step we wonder about is your own call to the pastoral ministry, to be a minister as such.
Well, that probably goes back to beyond the time when I accepted the challenge. From the time I went to Halifax, I was 16 years old and I went to Halifax to work. From the time I went to Halifax and got into church work, I was doing work in the Sunday school and with boys groups and that sort of thing, and in the wider field like the YMCA. But there came one particular time, I don't know if you remember the Oxford group, if you ever in your studies came across it. It was a witnessing team, an international witnessing team, visited Halifax. And one of them spoke at our church on a Sunday morning, and it interested me. And during the week, a chum of mine and myself went to St. Matthew's Church in Halifax where this team was witnessing.
Yes.
The first man got up, and I don't know where he was from. He told how in his career he was searching for a meaning for his life. He was getting places in economically and that, but not spiritually. And it never came to him until he surrendered to Jesus Christ. Then another man got up from somewhere else in the world, and he told his story, how he struggled to find a meaning for his life. He couldn't until he surrendered to Jesus Christ. And the third one was a girl from Britain, one of the Society of Butterflies, who went from the Duke of Bedford's garden party to the Duke of Devonshire's going out, you know. And she told how her story. But couldn't find happiness until she surrendered to Jesus Christ. And then there was a man got up after that, the 4th member of the team, and he told his story. And it was the same thing. By the time they were through, something was saying to me, Freeman, all that's wrong with you is you're a coward. You're afraid to trust God. I was doing a lot of church work. As a volunteer, I directed the boys' work in the home church. I was teaching in the Sunday school. I was a deacon there. I was doing volunteer work at the YMCA. And I was saying, well, Lord, what more do you expect of a man? He's married, the depression is on, and he's doing everything he can do. But that boy said, Freeman, you're a coward. You're afraid to trust God. And that bugged me for 4 months. I was afraid to go. I only had my grade 10. I didn't have my matriculation even, which scared me even more. But at last I prayed, and I said, Lord, you show me the money to keep my family 1 month, and I'll resign my job. What do you think happened in 3 days?
I can guess the money came through.
I earned a month's salary in 3 days. I was on commission. A month's salary in 3 days. And on the strength of that, I resigned my job. I went up to Horton Academy at Acadia and on through college.
So you had your training there. Those must have been exciting days.
Pretty hard days.
Hard days,
I had to work my way through. I didn't have any money behind me, and I had to work my way through. I wound up owing a 1.5 year salary, but that's another story.
I'm sure, yes. Now, so you felt pretty much prepared for the task then after your training there?
Yes, I'm sure it was. I'm sure I was. I had an idea of what I was getting into.
Yes.
I had ideas as to what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do it. And when I went in the ministry, this might interest somebody, there were 3 things I determined. The first was people would always count. No matter, my own personal interest would never come into the picture. People would always count. The second one was money will never count. And I'm glad for that because it's enabled me to do some things that would appear stupid to try if it weren't for that resolution. And the third one was I would never go to a place unless I felt the Lord wanted me there. And that has paid off best of all, because in no church do you go without meeting some problem or other. And instead of saying, if I'd only gone to Honolulu instead of coming here, I wouldn't have met this. Instead of saying that, you say, well, Lord, you called me here. There's an answer. Show me the answer. And I learned, never run away. Back off and look at it, but never run.
That's
so I'm always thankful for those 3 resolutions.
Yes, that's great. Perhaps you could tell us about some of your first ministry opportunities in the churches you worked in.
Well, the first opportunity came, I had finished my matriculation work at Horton Academy, and a friend of mine was preaching at Black River, and he took sick. And the doctor, I volunteered to take his services until he got better if he'd put the gas in my car, which I couldn't afford. And that was the agreement. But the doctor stepped in. He said, you're not going back. That changed the picture. They called me to stay. And I was at Black River in Greenfield, and which also include what is now East Wolfville. And I adopted Bishopville down between Hantsport and Greenfield on the side. So that was my first pastorate.
Which was a busy beginning then.
3.25 years.
Yes, where are some other places you ministered?
Well, I left there and went to Kennard over in the valley here.
Yes.
Which was a 4-church pastorate. And I could not have had a happier time, a better starting place if I tried. I got in with people who were interested. They encouraged me and allowed me to do my best and encouraged me in it. And they were great people. And I spent 5 years there. And maybe it might interest somebody, I don't know if it would or not, but how I happened to accept Kennard. There were 3 churches open for me when I came back to college for my last year. One was at Annapolis Royal, one was at Kennard, and the other was at Clementsville. The Clementsville one was the first. But there had been a threatened division there, and I was a friend of the pastors. So I thought, well, that would be 2 strikes against me, and I couldn't go. I had a feeling that Kennard was one of these typical communities, a business farmer who thought more of their business than they did of God, and I wasn't going to waste my life on that. So that left Annapolis Royal. But if I went to Annapolis Royal, which is next door to Clementsville, what would Clementsville say? He wouldn't come to a country church, but he'd go to a town church quick enough. I wouldn't have anyone say that. So it threw me back at Kennard, and it was a very happy thing. It was the Lord's call.
Good, yeah. Now, I wonder if there's some particular things you could mention, the things that you learned from your experiences in these churches that you ministered in.
Those churches?
Yeah.
Well, at the Black River, I had a chance to put into practice what I had determined should be done. And I tried to be a good pastor. Not only did I call on the people in the church, but I called on people in the community. I felt that the church should minister because it was the only church in the community. And I made some wonderful friends and still have them after 60 years. At Kennard, it was different. It was my first church of any size, and I had to put into practice my experience in administration and development, and it was a good experience. It was a big enough church to challenge me, and it certainly was. The war broke out in the middle of it, and so there was a lack of leadership, and I did a lot of boys' work in Kennard as well, young people's work.
Yes. You're also well known for a lot of work in Newfoundland. Perhaps you could tell us briefly about that experience.
Yeah, I had one church between. I was in Kentville for 13 and a half years after I left Kennard. Maybe I should touch that first.
Yes.
Because, when I went to Kentville, when I was called to Kentville, I also had to make a choice. Kentville and New Glasgow both called the same week, and I had to choose. But what swung things in favor of Kentville was the work it was developing around the town, outside of the town. I felt that it would be a tragedy if someone came in who was not concerned and simply said, I'm busy enough in town, and forget the other. It doesn't, that work that they were developing outside really pulled me. It made me feel the Lord wanted me there. But I was scared stiff. And I went to see Dr. DeWolf, who was one of the teachers at the Divinity College at the time. And I told him how scared I was. He said to me, in effect, well, the fact you're scared is a good omen. You better go.
I suppose he thought you had a realistic view of the situation then.
And then Kentville was a large church. I followed a very capable man. Dr. Waldo Macomb had been there for 12 years, I think. And he was a good organizer and an excellent pastor and greatly beloved. So I had to follow in his heels. And I found it was a good experience for me. And he was still living in there, although he was working as a secretary of the convention. And he was most cooperative, and I would go to him quite frequently for a bit of advice. But I had to grow or sink. There's no alternative. I had to grow or sink.
One or the other.
And the church did grow. It grew from about 580, I think that was the total membership when I went there. It was almost 1,000 when I left, resident and non-resident. So it was a good experience. And after that length of time, I was almost saying to myself, well, Lord, why don't you make me feel towards some of these other churches that are making inquiries? But nothing, I didn't feel toward them, and I turned them down. Until B.D. Stevens, who was the contractor, a prominent Baptist layman, approached me about going to Newfoundland to develop the work in a little fledgling beginning in St. John's, and it was love at first sight. I just felt the Lord wants me there, and I accepted the call.
Was that the First Baptist Church?
Yes.
In Newfoundland?
It had been started a year or so before. It was very, very weak, and it needed a lot of vision that it wasn't getting. And it was a real experience. I went on condition that I'd have permission to form new Baptist congregations wherever I found Baptist groups. So that gave me lots of scope. And in the 8 years there, we developed work in Corner Brook, Stephenville, Placentia Bay, and the beginnings of work at Gander, and also some contacts along the Conception Bay area. So it was a busy and profitable time.
Yes, I can see, yeah. Yeah. Now then, you returned to the mainland after that period. What
Yes.
was your next step?
Well, we had been there 8 years, very happy, and if you had told me I was going to be leaving there 6 months before I did, I said, you're crazy. But when the Aldershot Alton Church asked if I'd come and give leadership there, it just seemed as though the Lord was saying, Freeman, you know this area, here's where you're needed. And I resigned and came back to Aldershot and Alton.
So you had a great experience there.
A real experience.
Yes.
And I'm sure now, as I look back, it certainly was the Lord's call. Because in those 10 years, a new church was built at Aldershot, Bethany Memorial. A new church was built in North Alton, and the South Alton Church was extended. So, and now what was a home mission field, and I came back on condition that they go off the home mission board. I took the licking for a few years, but it has grown and is now 2 full-time pastorates.
Yes.
So it has been blessed and used.
Several times you've talked about the call and finding an understanding of what the next step is.
Yeah.
Perhaps you could tell us a bit of how, before you get there, you know it's the right thing. It's easy to look back in hindsight.
Well, yes. Well, what happens is that if you're in a church perhaps up to 3 years or more, some church has a feeling, well, maybe he'd like to move now. He's doing all right there. Maybe he'd like to move. And you have to sort these things out. And what I've depended on is to pray and say, Lord, make me to feel toward these things. Give me a feeling of what you want done. And it has never failed me. Never failed me. And like when after 10 years, I just felt my usefulness at Aldershot and Alton was finished. I've been able to divide the field into 2 during that time, and it was time for me to go.
Now, following that, what was your next step?
Well, I finished Aldershot on the last Sunday in August of 1975. I had told the General Secretary of Convention that if he needed a troubleshooter, I thought I could handle it. Well, there was it wasn't quite a troubleshooter job, but I finished the last of August, and the first Sunday in September I was down at Argyll. And I spent 8 months there as an interim until they got a pastor. From there, I went to Cook Island, I think it was. I spent 2 months there as interim. And I should have had a list of these, but I think at that point I went back to Newfoundland for 2 months to do some special work in all the churches. And then I came back to Westport, I think it was. And I spent 2 months there as interim. So it was interim work until for about 2 years of doing interim work. Then I did interim work at Bayers Road Church, Halifax for 4 months. Then came a real troubleshooter job at Lower Granville. And Eugene Thompson was the area minister at the time. He asked me if I'd go down and see what I could do there to help stabilize things at Lower Granville. And I spent 2.5 very happy years there. And the church pulled together wonderfully well, and it has been going strongly ever since.
Yes.
After that, I think again, it may have been Eugene, he asked me if I would go to Mount Uniacke, which had been the tag end of a student pastorate for a number of years, and there were times when a student couldn't get there, so the work died. They'd revived a year before and put a student in, 2 years before, and put a student in, and he managed to hold things, but it needed to be developed. And so I was there 5 years, and in the 5 years the church was built and the parsonage was built, and they were able to call a man. So then the last 6 months at Uniacke, B.D. Stevens again came into the picture, at Uniacke too. And finally, at one point, his wife died, and my wife and I looked after his home for him, and we were living there in Halifax. And he and I were talking about possible church extension work. He's been keenly interested in that. And there were three areas. What they call the corridor between Enfield and Elmsdale and Lance. The second one was the Prospect Road area of Halifax, and the third one was Lake Echo in Dartmouth. So we hopped in the car, we made a survey of the Elmsdale area, we made a survey of the Lake Echo area, and a very casual one of Prospect. But you can't do three things at once. We decided the first thing was Elmsdale. So I started in, I'd take a day a week and go and call visits in the Elmsdale, Enfield, Lance area. And by the end of 6 months, I had left. Finally, I arranged and I left Mount Uniacke and took over work at Elmsdale. Like to know how stupid it was?
What do you mean by that?
Well, that's one thing about being on pension.
You were retired by this time.
Yes, it means you can do some things that the average person would say were crazy.
Yes.
But I went to Elmsdale for 6 months without any pay. And I took my old age pension to pay my car expense.
I
can't see anything, figure anything more stupid in the eyes of the everyday world.
Well, you stuck to your rule that money would not matter, didn't you? Yeah.
And then at the end of 6 months, they gave me the equivalent of $4,000 a year for car expense. 3 months more, they gave me $100 a week toward household maintenance. At the end of another 3 months, they started paying me $100 a week salary. It's been a good experience. I wouldn't trade it for the world.
I guess, yeah.
And the last 6 months I was in Elmsdale, I started going down to Lake Echo, developing work. But then the V.D. Stevens died, and we had no base to work from, and I handed over to a student pastor who went down.
So this was in your retirement. It really became a time of church planting for you.
That's right.
And did you have an official retirement at some point?
Yes, 1975.
Yes, but you kept going.
I haven't learned how to retire yet.
That's right, yes. Now, beyond these roles in churches in different places in the Maritimes, what have been some of your roles in the Baptist Convention of the Atlantic
Well, in the Baptist Convention, I suppose I've served on most of the boards. When I was in Kentville, I was the chairman of the Christian Education Board, and also chairman of the Ministerial Education Board, which handled the students and grants and that sort of thing. I was on the Home Mission Board, and I served 2 terms on the Overseas Mission Board. I was on the Baptist Foundation for one part of a term. I was the president of convention the year 1954-55. I think that's about all. Oh, I was on the board of the United Baptist Bible Training School for a number of years. From almost the start, not quite, because Dr. Brinton was on the initial committee, and after a year he had to resign because he was principal, and I took his place.
So you've had really quite a few roles in the convention itself. Now beyond this, beyond the Maritimes and that, have you had some roles in the broader Baptist world?
No, I haven't really. As a president of convention, I was member of the council of the Baptist Federation that year, but I wasn't an official appointee.
Now, beyond the Baptist Convention, have there been significant ties in other denominations that have been important to you?
Yes, quite a bit of that. While I was working in Halifax and doing boys' work, the Halifax City had a boys' work board, and I was a member of it, and I was president of it for a year, 2 or 3 years. And then in the YMCA, I first joined as a member of one of the gym classes, and then I was one of the original group of senior leaders, volunteer work. And then, in addition to that, the boys' work secretary was working with the boys of the slum area of Halifax giving them a night a week at the Y. And I was with him for 2 or 3 years as a volunteer leader. From boys' work, the Religious Education Council, which was before your day, was formed by the Baptist United Church and the Church of Christ Disciples. And I was on their boys' work board for a number of years. I also did a lot of camping.
Yeah, that's an important ministry.
As part of a ministry. The MREC had camps at different points in the Atlantic region. One of them was at Pinehurst in Lunenburg County, and I acted as a leader there for several years. And then I went to one at Chance Harbor in Pictou County as a swimming director, and then the following year to Hillside Myra, Cape Breton, in the same capacity. And I directed a Baptist camp at Chickahawk, northern New Brunswick, and I taught the Bible course at the leadership camp at Weejaseekum 1 year. So, and then at Kingswood, our own Baptist camp, I was there from the beginning. I was one of the original group, and I served as the secretary and on the trustees until I went to Newfoundland.
Well, Dr. Fenerty, we thank you for sharing much of your experience in a very diversified ministry over the years, and we look forward to hearing more about your plans and your work in the present and in the future. Thank you very much.
Hi. Thanks for letting me be here.